So, November 13th, Laudato Si, new commandments were handed down today. Apparently, it's a bunch of bullshit, basically. I don't even want to dignify it with reading. So, anyway, this is the denial of reality. When the leading churches of the United States, uniting upon such points of doctrine as are held by them in common, shall influence the state to enforce their decrees and to sustain their institutions, then Protestant America will have formed an image of the Roman hierarchy, and the infliction of civil penalties upon dissenters will inevitably result. That's Ellen G. White writing in 1888. And that accurately describes what we're seeing now in the world with the Antichrist ceremony going on for the last, it'll go on for another week, I think, but starting in Egypt and extending to this farcical, it's a mockery of God. It's a farcical new Ten Commandments that are all this New Age rubbish, the Alan Watts, Allen Ginsberg, and Oprah and Deepak Chopra, and it might as well be written by Whoopi Goldberg and Joy Behar or any of the self-help Joel Osteens, what have you. It's a lot of fluffy, happy face, feel a sense of joy and wonder. All right. And he shall speak great words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and think to change times and laws. And they shall be given into his hand until a time and times and the dividing of time. That's the book of Daniel, chapter 7, verse 25. And you can see this is what's happening. He shall wear out the saints of the Most High and think to change times and laws. So now we have completely different laws, and not only are they different, they're in opposition to the laws of God and the commandments of God. And they're being given by a false pope who's a Jesuit pope. And he's brought under him all the Protestants, as White is saying, and all the Muslims and Jews and Mormons and all the other religions. And this is just as described in the book of Revelation. The one world religion, Babylon, if you would call it what you want. I see Babylon, Mystery Babylon, as the United States of America for obvious reasons. And what follows, will describe some of those obvious reasons. Klaus Schwab, 2020, the pandemic represents a rare but narrow window of opportunity to reflect, reimagine, and reset our world. Now that's the language of communism. And that's what this is. Year zero, the French Revolution, reset the calendar. That's what Daniel's talking about. Change times, reset time. Pol Pot, the year zero, the Chinese Communist Party at year zero. Destroy all the fathers, destroy all of the institutions, destroy all of the teachers, shoot them. That's what happened at the Children's Revolution. Same thing with the Bolshevik Revolution. Overthrow all of the laws of God. Religion is the opiate of the people. But now we have the New Age religion. So it's a much better opiate. So it's okay. Because the New Age religion, you take drugs, you dance, you party. As long as you don't harm anyone, according to the new commandments. Nobody's harmed. Get out your children, and as long as they are having fun. Back in the days of ancient Rome. They were all having fun. Joy and wonder. Prince Charles, 2020, okay, the same year as Klaus Schwab. This is the World Economic Forum. Now King Charles, incidentally. There is a golden opportunity to seize something good from this crisis. Global crises know no borders and highlight how interdependent we are as one people sharing one planet. Yeah, you think they're going to share it with you? You got another thing coming. Unless we take the action necessary and build in a greener and more inclusive and sustainable way, then we will have more and more pandemics. See, there's the fear factor, right? If you don't comply with the science, then you're going to die. It's horrible, but it's going to be green, just like in the Ukraine. There, all the greenery that's going on, all the droughts in the Southwest, and the people losing farmland. This is 2020. So 2 years later, we're going on into the third year. See how green everything is, and how the new leaders are protecting us against these terrible diseases. Rahm Emanuel, I don't know who's familiar with Rahm Emanuel. He was the mayor of Chicago, and he was Barack Obama's chief of staff. And he said this during the 2008 financial crisis, which was presided over by Barack Obama, where he set up this crisis, which we're in now. This is the final crisis. This is the crisis that's the world economic system is not going to recover from by design of Rahm Emanuel and Barack Obama and their successors. You let a serious crisis go to waste. And what I mean by that is an opportunity to do things that you think you could not do before. That's just a repeat of Klaus Schwab. That's said in '08, though. So Klaus Schwab, it's all been long planned. I mean, this goes back to the Freemasons. It goes back to back and back and back through history. And it's the rule of Satan. Here's another felicitous description of progressives by Rahm Emanuel that he let slip, apparently. Progressive liberals are fucking retarded. That's about what Rahm Emanuel thinks of you liberals that elected Rahm Emanuel and Barack Obama. And why did he say that? Progressive liberals are fucking retarded? Well, he said it because they expected to get a universal health care program. And they're screaming at Obama, well, because Obama promised this, and he promised full transparency. As soon as he got into office, he put into place Hillary Care. And he closed everybody out of the discussion. So it wasn't transparent at all. So Emanuel said progressive liberals are fucking retarded. And I'll say, they are pretty fucking retarded because they continue to elect the same people year in and year out, thinking they're going to get what? Oh, a universal health care plan any day now. It's impossible to argue with Rahm Emanuel about his disparaging contempt for the Democratic base that faithfully returns to vote back in the same presidents, congresspeople, mayors, governors, and other public officials who have at this point completely destroyed the futures of every working class person whose interests they pretend to have at heart. Americans in both parties are so thoroughly hypnotized by the theatrics and false promises never delivered, it's hard to imagine they have any contact left with reality at this point. Like children, their response to the truth is to retreat completely into one media-created psychosis or another. This goes for Republican voters as well. It's just a matter of whichever culture they prefer. The one thing they all seemingly agree on is sports and entertainment. Christianity is simply a label having little or nothing to do with the words in the Bible. And that's what we see in the Laudato Si proclamation today, which reads like Oprah Winfrey crossed with, I don't know, the Cocker Spaniel. During the coronavirus, Americans across all demographics increased their daily TV watching from 5 hours a day to 5.5 hours a day. TV watching occupied the most time of any leisure activity. That's from U.S. News and World Report in July 2021. Either they were doing that or they were going out and rioting in the downtown districts with the money given them by the Treasury Department, printing more and more bills and causing the inflation we have now and the hyperinflation we have now. That's what's driving inflation. It's printing money. It has nothing to do with rates or anything else. And they're doing it by design and they're doing it purposefully. The time spent not watching TV, meaning socializing, is occupied by talking about what they've been watching on TV the night before, which is how the fantasy narratives or false reality is consistently maintained. The other leisure activities would be based on the leisure activities they're watching on TV. This is just to say that the most TV watching is by elderly people watching other Americans engaged in professional leisure activities like sports, sailing around on luxury yachts, and so on. One of the greatest leisure activities Americans are constantly preoccupied with is coveting their neighbor's goods. That was one of the old commandments that have been replaced. Oddly enough, Christians are largely unaware that this is a sin, just as they're unaware that lying, slander, violent wars, sexual fantasies, pleasure-seeking, dishonoring parents, and so on are sins. And they've all been replaced by the Pope, so that's consistent with his giving people what they want in their religious leaders. They don't want to obey laws. They don't want to honor God. They don't want to worship God. They don't want to bow down before God. And so this is no different than Buddhists, Hindus, Mormons, Sufis, or any of the other religions. To be clear, in this and all other cases, I'm using the word pagan not as a form of disparagement, but simply to differentiate other beliefs from the traditional Christian beliefs of the first century. Calvin Coolidge, who presided over one of the most disastrous administrations in history, said in 1925, it's just before the Great Depression, collapse of the stock market, the chief business of the American people is business. Today in France, mass protests are bringing the country to a standstill, with one of the trade union spokesmen, Victor Mendez, saying, most of the families are having a hard time buying a box of bread or even meat. That's not possible in France with the world's sixth strongest economy. These mass protests have been going on all over Europe and are intensifying as the crisis of hyperinflation described by Mendez is hitting everyone. It's an interesting choice of words as well as meaningless, which is what France is most known for, having passed on the disease to America of postmodernism. Of course, it's possible in France for families to be having a hard time buying bread and meat, since that's what's occurring. Postmodernism itself is a construct based on the construct modernism, the Renaissance, the Baroque, Romanticism, modernism, and the thousands of derivatives are just labels. They're meaningless words. This is all, Orwell has already said this. So do the postmodernists. So do the modernists. Yet they keep using this bizarre new language. Like, so Mendez is saying it's not possible that we cannot feed our families and that meat is so expensive when it's happening. So it's not only possible, it's actually happening, Victor. You can't deny reality. The name of this little essay is The Denial of Reality, which human beings today, TV watchers particularly, or people within virtual reality theater groups, think that it doesn't really exist, or that there's some way that they can. This is the black magic component of the New World religion or paganism, which is that somehow you can magically use words and incantations and spells and change reality. Just doesn't happen anymore. It's the same thing with Christianity. Christianity's gone over to this. And America will no doubt take an event where their TV feeds are cut off before they will accept they've canceled their futures by running from one election cycle to the next, voting enthusiastically for whichever party they want to worship as their messiah or savior from the other party. I'm using the word America for the West in general, who have spent the last 70 years worshiping America and its junk culture. An American culture isn't American, since America is a derivative culture itself from British culture, which is a derivative culture from Roman culture. America is a degraded version of British culture, just as British culture is a degraded form of American culture. In the race to the bottom, America has been the leader. Hunter Biden's $500,000 digital painting is the evidence. What else is this other than false idol worship? The false idol is the business, mentioned by Coolidge and repeated by recent presidents from Reagan to Bush to Clinton to Manuel. With Carville's "It's the economy, stupid" slogan, to Bush, to Trump, to Biden. Moral issues revolve entirely around the right to fight illegal and immoral wars, capital punishment, abortion, and the funding of such, all of which are sins in the Judeo-Christian religion as they are in many pagan religions. At this point, America and Western Europe have descended below the morality of pagan Rome, which at least had the Stoics, the Marcus Aurelius, who had you fall on your sword if you lose a battle, or you cut your wrists, and if you betray the public trust. Nowadays, that's how you get rewarded. Look at Hunter Biden. Look at the Bidens. Look at the Clintons. Look at I'm using the most egregious are the Democrats. It's the same thing with the Republicans, but they are not in power. The party in power is the one that is going to be the most corrupt, because they can get away with it since they control the media. Why Americans think that they're going to be led to utopia by these thieves and criminals is really beyond me. I think they're drugged. Europeans so vociferously protesting they're being crushed by their own government leaders have consistently supported and elected them in the same way that Americans and Canadians have consistently elected the same leaders. The revolutionary children of today, from Greta Thunberg to the social justice warriors gluing themselves to paintings and repetition of so-called artists like Banksy, have no political agenda whatsoever in mind. Dada and its derivative neo-Dada, pop, from their inception have been destructive and anti-art. Calling this creative destruction is just as idiotic as the Biden Build Back Better agenda, now being visited on Ukraine, just as the same agenda has been visited on the so-called third world, that we're colonizing. For centuries, the social justice nincompoops imagine that they aren't colonialists themselves, along with believing whatever the so-called science tells them. If they want to save the world from global warming, why are they not demanding their BLM leaders, Thunberg and all the rest of their leaders, turn over their own estates and property to the poor immigrants and refugees whose health and future they claim to be so devoted in protecting or saving? Why don't they stop buying all the designer clothes, and why don't they stop with this theatrical entertainments where they're addicted to? It's going nowhere, obviously, except right where we are now, which is on the verge of complete economic disaster and climate catastrophe is brought on by us, not by uh, global warming. We're filling the whole planet with toxic chemicals. We're poisoning ourselves. We have the last thing we have to worry about is, the climate warming. We'll be dead long before it warms, given the nuclear war that we're in the middle of prosecuting. So nuclear wars, as it were. And I don't have any solutions for this, incidentally, like everybody else. There is this is not going to change. It doesn't matter how many protests you have or how many, surfaces you glue yourself to or lie down in front of. You've brought on this disaster on yourselves. You've been used if you're one of the people out there, burning down your central businesses, because those are your own businesses. The small businesses are the backbone of this country. Half of them are done. Half of them are finished. Where is employment going to come from? Well, it ain't going to come from Twitter, because they just laid off their workforce, or Meta, or anything. So where's it going to come from? This is not very productive activity. Nihilism, anarchy, making proclamations and manifestos and shaking your fists at your parents. Simple facts like those above are invariably labeled Russian propaganda. Like I'm spreading Russian propaganda now. And right-wing conspiracies. Yeah, I'm a right-wing conspirator. And this is what passes for journalism today, is you just say everybody else is lying except the New York Times. That's from so-called left and right media, because the Fox News and Forbes and The Economist are all this, that's what was supposed to be conservative news, right? This is where the interests of the state coincide and collude together to create a seamless false reality. Teenagers, along with most adults who have the same childish and simplistic beliefs, go out spray painting buildings, destroying statues, or encouraging their children to do so they can relive the glory days. And where is Bob Dylan? Where are all the anti-war protesters exactly? The Joni Mitchells and the Paul Simons and their rock concerts, the Neil Youngs. They're for the war in Ukraine. Bono, they're for the war of Ukraine. What's happening in the Ukraine is that Russia has won the war. All the news reports are false. They're getting ready for this winter offensive, and then they're going to completely steamroll. Unless there's a nuclear event, which I don't anticipate, but who knows? I mean, this is like they don't care. These are narcissists. Narcissists are self-destructive. They're old. They're ready to. They don't care. Plus, they've got underground bunkers that they're have access to. If anything is really going to go down, they're going to be nowhere on the surface of the planet. And there are lots of other people that are, catastrophists that are planning on going underground and then coming back up. The meek inheriting the earth, I guess. Whatever's going to be left of it. Therefore, they're fighting for social justice and stopping global warming from destroying their future. At the same time, they're calling for war against Russia, Haiti. We just invaded Haiti. Must have blinked. Nobody's paying attention. Nobody cares. I mean, how many times does the U.S. have to go in and change regimes and destroy other countries and put in puppet dictators? That's what happened in Ukraine, incidentally. Is we overthrew or had the legitimate elected government overthrown and then installed a Poroshenko, a puppet dictator. I mean, all you have to do is look back at the newspapers from the time to understand, and not the propaganda newspapers. I mean, there's it's like you're going to go back and read the history of the Vietnam War by reading the New York Times or listening to Walter Cronkite's, something like that. When it's all shown to be a lie by the time all the destruction is done. So why do people assume that the New York Times, when has the New York Times ever told the truth about a war? I really wish somebody would forward that information to me. I'd love to know a time, I'm talking the entire history of the New York press going back to the Civil War and the constant call for genocide during the American Indian Wars. But now they're all of a sudden screaming about the imperialists and the genocidal maniacs, and nothing to do with the New York newspapers. They've always been for peace and justice and fairness. It isn't that there's no common sense to be found anywhere. There's no sense at all. In fact, this is the very basis of so-called modern art, the systematic derangement of the senses. That's what Arthur Rimbaud proposed, along with Aleister Crowley. And all of this is carried out on a mass level by the communist revolutionaries in America and elsewhere in the 1960s. It was a global communist revolution, student revolution. Aleister Crowley was the most popular cultural figure at the time. I think that denying this is happening when he appeared through the auspices of Jimmy Page, creating metaphysical bookstores, which mushroomed all over the place, specifically to sell the magic, ceremonial, satanic magic, how to practice Satanism by Aleister Crowley. It's a satanic religion. It's astounding to me that people like Page or Dylan or whatever can say openly that they worship Crowley or Satan or or demon possessed or interview after interview, including the Bradley interview with Bob Dylan, and then people deny, and then they'll deny it. They'll they laugh it off as if Satan doesn't exist or as if evil doesn't exist, except in the person of Vladimir Putin, of course, or Saddam Hussein, or it's always the other, the Ayatollahs. No, evil exists, Satan exists, God exists, Jesus exists. Most religions, acknowledge that. They just don't understand who Jesus was. And that's all, including the Pope and the people with the Pope. So and all the '60s revolution was the Bolshevik revolution repeated under Lenin and Stalin. And this is just the final, the end game, that was begun by modernists. That's the modernist project. I mean, the modernist project was to elevate the art of the insane, primitive cultures, Egypt, Picasso's doing the brothel scenes, all sex, drugs, rock and roll came along in the 50s, the 60s. But prior to that, you had Stravinsky's Rite of Spring, Paganism, and Satie's, I don't know, beer, Montparnasse, and the Mountain of the Gods, Parnassus, and then Moulin Rouge. It's the same thing. There's nothing new under the sun, as Ecclesiastes, the prophet, wrote or spoke and then was written. And who is he but God? God is saying the same thing from the beginning to the end of time. Is right now. There isn't any time. There isn't any such thing as progress. There isn't any such thing as this new Ten Commandments, this new age. What's new about it exactly? What's new about Aleister Crowley? It's just the ancient Egyptian religion. It's just practicing child sacrifice. It's just the Aztecs, who were they sacrificing, or the Mayans, who were they sacrificing? I remember when I was it wasn't that long ago, in the 70s, the Mayans were peaceful people. They didn't do any sacrificing. Oh, and with Neil Young, the Aztecs were peaceful people. No violence with the Aztecs at all. They just had these beautiful women and beautiful men standing up straight. It's bizarre. I don't know. Neil Young has like a 50 IQ or something. Sorry, Neil, or sorry, fans of Neil, but who in the world? I mean, what kind of, even if you're taking a lot of drugs, to think that the Aztecs were a peaceful, peace-loving people living in harmony in the Garden of Eden in Mexico? Come on. I mean, pick up a simple history book, Neil, or Neil's followers. But that's how we've gotten to where we are. It's this kind of fantasy utopia where you don't pay the least bit of attention to historical reality or current reality or anything else. You live in a drugged out pleasure state and pretend you're a holy person and you're waging heavy peace. Yeah. So you go to what war was opposed after the Vietnam War by Neil Young exactly, or Bob Dylan? I was protesting the Iraq. I didn't see them or hear anything from them at the time. Anyway, I don't know. I get distracted by these memories. And it's the same thing with Harold Bloom. To think that this was opposed by so-called classicists, the Western literature people like Harold Bloom, is absurd. Since Bloom and the Jewish thinkers of the Frankfurt School that Bloom comes out of were all communists and devotees of Rimbaud and the Surrealist Dadaists. If you read the Western canon of Bloom, it's filled with the Surrealist, Dadaist. Not only that, is Bloom and the left academics were all devotees of Hillary Clinton. So give me a break. And also notable is you have David Foster Wallace as the guy who hung himself and viewed Bloom as a phony and a moron. But at the same time, he's following the same prescription for postmodernist literary success, which is this empty nihilism and meaninglessness. that if you don't have a belief in God, you're bound to be looking at like Nietzsche. You're bound to be looking at a meaningless void, and you're staring into the abyss, and the abyss is staring back at you. That, and who is that? That's Narcissus. It's narcissism. Nietzsche's a narcissist. Bloom, Wallace, the people, all these performers, they're sitting there in front of a, you know, camera and watching their performances or not, but it's always a performance. And they're staring into the abyss. And they're taking everybody else into the abyss with them because they're saying there's no God. And I'm telling you, there is a God. So you can either follow that, pursue that God at all costs by following and obeying the commandments, or you're going down this road with this merry prankster group on drugs, and it's not going to end well. Any more than David Foster Wallace hanging from the end of a rope, or Robin Williams, or Jeffrey Epstein, or whether or not somebody's putting the noose around your neck or you're putting the noose around your neck. Arshel Gorky was another one. Mark Rothko cuts his wrists in the bathtub. Jackson Pollock drives into a tree, killing another woman in the back of her car. So that's that. As far as I'm concerned, that's a homicide. You drive drunk with somebody at 100 whatever miles per hour in your roadster like Bonnie and Clyde, and in a drunken fit, forcing this young girl to get into the car. She's screaming, which only makes Pollock. It's murder. And how does it come about? That's the satanic. That's what inhabits people, is the demonic. All right. And this is known as the revolution eating its own children, right? The revolution eats its own children. This goes back to the Jacobins, and they're the new Jacobins in New York. They even they're so proud of their new Jacobin magazine. Like they're going to initiate the new French Revolution. Yeah, they're going to guillotine it. They're guillotining everybody. Everybody dies. It's no different then or now. It's the same thing over and over and over again. The person who coined that expression, revolution eating its own children, was from Geneva, which is where the Large Hadron Collider is located. It's a 3-mile train ride, from Zurich. Zurich was the birthplace of Dada surrealism and futurism fascism at the Cabaret Voltaire during the First World War. This is where and when the principles of Rimbaud and Crowley were enshrined. The Marxist Satanist Vladimir Lenin was located there at the same time as well. Was this coincidence? Was this coincidence? The Genevan Jacques Mallet de Pan, or Pan, that's an interesting name, isn't it? Was an opponent of the French Revolution after he was a proponent of destroying the establishment. He saw the French Revolution, he grew up as giving in to the spirit of the times and debasing the whole culture of Europe, just as the Goya painting depicting Saturn devouring his children illustrates it. This is contrary to the interpretation of knuckleheads like Time Magazine's Robert Hughes, who also saw Robert Crumb as Peter Bruegel. It's symbolizing the revolution eating its own children. The painting of Saturn with a child's head. It's also symbolizing child sacrifice. Hello, the Phoenicians, the Egyptians, the Mayans, so on and so forth, up to Hollywood and the sex slave traffic. It's the same thing. It doesn't change. We can deny it or say, oh, it's a vast right-wing conspiracy. There's no such thing as grooming. There's no such thing as sex slavery. Yeah, and it's all under the rug now. Never happened. Jeffrey Epstein doesn't exist. He didn't have a Masonic Illuminati temple on the island. There's just pictures of it. Oh, it was created in somebody's Photoshop files. It's all testified to by the women that were there, the survivors, who were under death threat, incidentally. The Virginia Roberts was under a credible death threat. And Epstein himself was murdered because he was unreliable, allegedly. I always have to pause because I used to run on, but all this gives me pause to think about. Japan began as a revolutionary himself, as a professor of French literature. He's writing in opposition to the ruling oligarchy of the upper class in Geneva. But early on, he saw that the trajectory of the various revolutionary movements would result in an even worse tyranny than that of the upper class. The moral values of the old world would be replaced by the tyranny of the mob. And mob rule always ends up in the same place: the total destruction of the society that it views as constraining its pursuits of Dionysian pleasures. From the French Revolution to the current decadence of destroying the entirety of whatever culture Napoleon had managed to steal from other countries and assemble in the Louvre. And all of this under the guise of bringing liberty, equality, and fraternity. The American Revolution derived from the French Revolution, both of them, along with Britain, feeding back the pleasure principle up until the present day, when wearing a VR helmet or implanting a neural link is the equality. The fraternity is getting doped up and watching TV together or dancing at church or rock festival. So the revolutions have liberated the people from the chains of their oppressors, expecting them to show some basic moral restraints like following the Ten Commandments. In other words, the revolutions had achieved their goals by the late 19th century, as the so-called independence of the French salon destroyed all the surviving classical values by replacing them with primitive or pagan art of one kind or another. All the so-called giants of modern art, like Matisse and Picasso, did was make so-called modern versions of African, Japanese, Arab art. Instead of making precise Moorish tiles, Matisse simply made crude paintings of them. Having accomplished the revolution of destruction of all former civilizations of both new and old worlds, where did the artistic revolutionaries have to go other than to the one-color supremacist paintings of the Bolshevik Malevich, Marcel Duchamp with his urinals and bicycle tires mounted on a stool? And after these glorious achievements, what was left to modernism but to repeat it all for the next 100 years? The only way to do that was by entirely destroying the education system, filling it with revolutionaries who would teach false histories, glorifying themselves in their films, art, music, all as new, never before seen. Woodstock Nation. Woodstock Nation is just a repeat of the nature culture in Germany, the nude dancing in the forest and what you see in the Bois de Boulogne in Paris now, and what you saw at all the pagan rites back in time. There's nothing new under the sun. So all they did was do a technological version of, turn it over to the computer, turn it over to AI, they'll do a better job. Photography, whatever new chemical compounds, that's art. The chemical factories come up with some new substance like acrylic paint, and that replaces oil paint. That's an improvement. Contrast this with so-called Christian music and art. monster truck rallies, women's wrestling. In response to this, Christians canonize Alice Cooper and death metal Christian music to show that Christian culture is just as triumphant and glorious as the Woodstock Nation culture of the left. So this is just they've become the same culture. It's the one world culture. Christianity is no different today than Woodstock Nation. They're the same thing. It's paganism. I mean, I'm not saying that everybody, is a pagan. I'm saying that the leadership of these churches see that you're not going to get that many people into a church where all you're quietly obeying and humbling yourself before the Almighty God. That doesn't give you much room for, putting on your costume and showing the world America's got talent, such as it is. Catholics like Raymond Arroyo and Laura Ingraham chirp away on Fox News about attending a Who concert in New Orleans. And today, God Himself, in the eyes of Catholics, is handing down the Ten Commandments of the New World Order that will protect all the children laying down in front of traffic or on expressways from global warming. Maybe someone can let Greta Thunberg and the rest of the feminist revolutionaries know that they've won. And the men are feminists as well. I mean, that's the pathetic thing about the men today, is they're also feminists. I mean, they let the women go out on the Pink Pussycat marches and cheer them on from the sidelines. I mean, what can you say about the left culture anymore, except what Isaiah said, is that women will rule them. Children will be their oppressors, and that's to Greta Thunberg, and Greta Thunberg's mom and dad will rule them. The women are ruling. That's why you have Christine Lagarde and Ursula, whatever her name is, and Hillary, and Kamala is going to be the next president. I'll lay odds on that one. They show their hand, and then you just have to wait for them to put the card down. Like Schwab, I mean, they've made no. It's not veiled. It's not unseen. They're so. It's like Satan he's the most vain. So he has to get credit. He has, all these, you have to get credit and say, look, you idiots, this is what I'm going to do to you. And, I know you don't understand what I'm saying at all, because on the other hand, I'm telling you, I'm going to solve, I'm giving you all these goodies, and I'm dancing, and I've just got the greatest music that you've ever can imagine. It's all electronic, and you've got the greatest apps, and you've got, I'm going to give you this whole incredible world that God can't deliver. I mean, God's world isn't as great as cyberspace and hallucinogenic drugs. God's world is boring compared to that. It's just really a bore. I mean, compared to like speedball with cocaine and amphetamines and psilocybin and ayahuasca, God is boring. Jesus is the most boring person in the world, isn't he? That's a very seductive pitch. I'll tell you that much. I fell for it. That's why I'm not being sarcastic or cynical or condescending or contemptuous or anything else. I'm saying, I went through this myself and know just how seductive it is to lose your mind and to experience this kind of ecstatic euphoria. But the price at the end of the day is you lose your soul. So I was just as much possessed by the demonic as anybody else when I was in the cultural, social, Marxist, jazz, rock, punk, etc. revolution. So, just to be clear, what I'm saying is that both right and left are part of exactly the same globalist agenda. Sean Hannity and Sean Penn embracing in love and happiness as they idolize Vladimir Zelensky, Laura Ingraham and the NPR radio, all ennobled by attending a concert by the oldie act of The Who, playing music that was never that great to begin with others. You can see them sanctified in Ken Russell's Glam Fest Tommy, released in 1975, starring Elton John, who played at Rush Limbaugh's wedding. In other words, Russell was showing that The Who were basically a typical disco band to anyone not aware of so-called rock musicians like Rod Stewart and his hot legs and all the, disco Rolling Stones and disco everybody once disco hit. I don't know, but maybe there's a few people that weren't capable of doing disco, is what I think. Like Bob Dylan, I don't think he could cut it with disco music. Because if disco was great in terms of dance music. But is it great spiritual music? See, that's the only thing I'm pointing out is it's not. You can't take that music and put it in a church and have people dance into it and then think that God is being honored or worshiped or praised. you know, get real. Christians out there, Buddhists, and the rest, the same thing goes. You can't take that music and call yourself a Buddhist. You think the Buddha or okay, well, the famous Thich Nhat Hanh from Plum Monastery in France, and Merton's pal, anti-Vietnam War activists, and the monks who were setting themselves on fire to protest the invasion by the North Vietnamese. They'd be out with Eckhart Tolle and Chogyam Rinpoche in Boulder. They'd be out having sex with each other, homosexual sex, in charge of the guy in charge of the uh, Tibetan Buddhist monastery there that Rinpoche left in charge. Everybody coming down with AIDS. That's not a moral judgment. That's just saying get real. That's not Buddhism. That's American New Age religion, and it ain't spiritual any more than Aleister Crowley is spiritual. Satanism is not a spiritual religion, it's Satanism. And just throwing out the commandments or pretending that part of the new Ten Commandments, from what I've seen, is that you're raising yourself above the ego. Yeah, Klaus Schwab, and you're raising yourself above the ego by destroying your brain, and attaching it to a neural network that it's insanity, but it's not just insanity, it's the demonic. That's what runs the internet. It's the Sinternet. It gives you the most horrific, if you go down into the depths of the internet, murder rooms and every kind of horror you can imagine. And you know, that's what's going on. I mean, that's what's going on with the ruling elites. That's what's going on Sex Slave Island and the Epstein Ranch, and those are hardly the Harvey Weinstein crowd all over California, the Jim Jones people, the Manson people, there were hundreds of cults like that. The Hells Angels, the Satan Slaves, the Mafia. The Bolshevik Revolution of 1917 was all but bloodless when it occurred. The tens of millions dead that came after it were accompanied by the stated goal of instituting the same year zero policies of subsequent communist revolutions. The Chinese Communist Revolution occurred in 1949, along with all the rest springing from World War II and the demolished economies. Today, the Great Reset to year zero is being formally announced in these conferences in the Mideast and Egypt by the Antichrist Pope at the head of the New World religion, and his disciples across the one world religious spectrum are all gathered underneath him. It's a similarly bloodless revolution in terms of there being any opposition by the masses at all. In fact, the masses are the ones insisting on it, just as they've launched World War III through their elected leaders. They venerate their unelected holy saints from Elon Musk to Bill Gates to Klaus Schwab, just as they venerate the technology and digitized shadowland. They all wander aimlessly inside, unaware that anything else might exist outside these personal fantasy worlds other than their own delusions of future grandeur. Well, that's it for tonight. I'm looking at the next week where the cryptocurrency meltdown is destroyed, that, absorbed into one cryptocurrency backer. Don't make market predictions other than to say that at a certain point there's going to be a liquidity crisis, and then all these currencies are going to be destroyed. They're already destroyed. Japan, the yen, the Bank of England, the pound, they're just being propped up by selling off debt into their own government, buying up the worthless debt market. And that's what we have going here, and that's what happened with cryptocurrencies. It's called a margin call. You have to put up more collateral. You don't have the collateral, and that's the end of the commodity or whatever it is. I'm going. Not to digress, but that's my nature. With the art market is what I'm curious about, because this stuff is such unbelievably thin in comparison to what art of the past was. It doesn't have any meaning. It doesn't have any content. It doesn't have any substance. It's just like cool or eye candy, or, it's the pleasure driven, which is content free. And so once it gives that little 1 second or 3 second charge, you just go to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. It's the Instagramming of Insta art, I guess you would call it that. And it becomes a logo. You put on your Warhol brand, and it shows you have taste, or Banksy brand. And all that died. Maybe nobody's aware of it, but it's like the 80s was Hearst, Coons, Schnabel, all these people that were selected by the Wall Street junk bond. It was the Reagan art, Reaganized art, Californicated art, because Reagan's is not this notion of Reagan as being a liberal and a Christian, hardly. I mean, he went to consult as astrologer. He's about as much a Christian as Clint Eastwood with, Jay-Z Knight as the reincarnated Ramtha spirit of the past, and that's paganism. I mean, California is the very heart and soul Hollywood of creating this Freemason because it was Freemasonic, but it's this mythic Eden, a mythic utopia of pleasure, the lost cities of Atlantis or what have you. And it's all romantic and comic, and sex and violence are the heart of it. So the art is only entertainment. I mean, it's not made for spiritual purposes like the art of the past, which has left us in this kind of limbo of constant motion pictures. Life is you just live fast and die young, and then there's nothing afterwards. Leave a good-looking corpse like James Dean did, or Jackson Pollock, a good-looking corpse like that, or Warhol death-oriented images like car crashes and Kennedy being shot and people jumping out of buildings and all that. It's a death cult. I mean, this isn't art. Art is about life. Art is, and this saying this is joy and wonder is baloney. I mean, take a lot of speed and you're joyous and everything's wonderful. But there is a real spiritual reality that is the opposite of the death cult. And that's the way, the truth, and the life. And that's Jesus Christ. And that only way to the Father is through him. And it takes discipline and fasting, and it takes prayer, and it takes being removed from this horror show. You'll be removed from it anyway, but it's just what you're going to end up with at the end of the naked lunch, as Kerouac named it. There's this horrible selling of your soul that has the wages of sin is death. That means eternal death. So I'm not a fire and brimstone person. I'm a realistic religious person, having gone through all of this experience and trying to give a warning to those who are so entranced by the excitements of cyberspace and this whatever this new age insanity amounts to. But you can see that what it really is nuclear war or wholesale destruction of Europe, deindustrialization of Europe, people unable to heat their homes and apartments, food in short supply, starvation. The party is over, and it's time to realize that. Rather than going down with the Titanic, what I see is people are on the Titanic and they just cannot pull themselves away from the floor show. That's all they've ever known. That's all they've ever known. And they look outside and say, it's icy, cold Atlantic. I don't want to go out there. But that's the only place where there's any safety. There's no safety aboard the party crew that's on this pleasure cruise that's sinking rapidly. But there is safety outside of it, and that's the metaphor I'm using, which is why God is continually saying to come out of this Babylon, come out of the world with all of its pleasures and all of its uh, delusions and all of its narcissism and all of its watching yourself, and others watching you. Watch yourself. I don't know how else to put it than that it's like this hypnotism. It's a hypnotic coma that has to be broken. I mean, it has to be broken. Like it's a drug addiction, in the sense that your brain gets pleasure from these images, and those images release pleasure chemicals, and that creates the neural circuitry in your brain. So if you're continuing to create these pleasurable experience, whether it's porn or sports or what, it doesn't matter. It's the pleasure. The sports are about hitting, boxing, all of these things that are primitive lizard brain preoccupations, visual things. And Buddhism or Christianity or Lao Tzu, Chinese philosophy, all these things are not active pleasure stimulation. So they create different neural pathways that will take you out of that realm of satanic fixation on one kind of perversion or another. Perversion meaning a perversion of what is natural to men and women. And people who don't know what a woman is are in big trouble. That's for sure. All right. God bless everybody.